funny thing about ADHD is that the condition in itself makes it difficult to get help, because what does ADHD impact?
Motivation.
Motivation. All right. So,
Yeah.
so then there's all the stigma with it, and there is everybody else's opinion and lots of misinformation. And so we've got a handful of things that you can do right now to get help for yourself. And we're listing them in progressive things from easier to sort of more involved.
So I think it was The Mindful Way Through Depression. I read a lot of time ago where they're talking about depression and scans of people's brain and the blood flow in their brain. And it's measurable that when you're stuck, calling it depression in this book, when you're stuck, your blood is flowing in old, stale circuits. So what can you do to get your blood flowing? Get some exercise. Move your body.
Number one. That's a great one. And ADHD is not enough dopamine in the brain. Guess what exercise does? Increases dopamine temporarily, but they actually make treadmills that people put their desks on so they can focus better. They make seats in schools that have pedals in them to increase dopamine.
Yeah.
These things actually work. There's a great book called, now I'm going to forget the name of the book, ADHD. Pardon me. Number 2 on our list, diet. That's something you can do. Start to feel more normal.
What's helped you in that department?
Vitamin D, which is produced by the sun. We're in the northern hemisphere. You don't get enough sun. Don't have enough vitamin D. It's critical for mood. B vitamins can be critical. You can Google it, and there's lots of different recommendations. St. John's wort, ginkgo, various things. You got to try different things. There's the Amen Clinic has good recommendations. Dr. Amen's book on non-medical approaches to treating ADHD.
I get a lot of organic food, and there's ethical choices in there. It's a big mess, right? But what I really like to do is eat what I feel like eating what I think is good to eat, and seeing how it affects my system.
Yeah.
It's hard over time. It's a little bit messier if you're not like straight up recording the data all the time. But there's a lot of noticeable experience about, finding the diet that works best for you. So, if you're coming from your average American diet, what I'm looking at is not some big drastic change, but how can you work more of a balance into your diet, and what works for you, and what you're willing to consider in changing, your standard behavior.
Yeah, I've definitely found what works for me as I've listened to you talk. High protein, low refined carb, low, fast acting carbs like flour and sugar and things like that. And the protein sort of sustains me because I can get really wonky, I've found. But again, is that an ADHD fix, or is it a general health fix? Probably general health. Does it help with ADHD? Maybe. But the point is, if you feel better, you do better. And we want to stack the deck in our favor. So that's why diet's critical.
No doubt.
Yeah.
And the next thing we had up was mindfulness, or being present. A lot of times people get stuck with this, especially folks with ADHD, because there's this myth that if you're being mindful, you're going to
Which is also like a form of meditation, right?
Right.
If you're not familiar with mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's paying attention to your body, essentially.
And your senses.
And your senses.
Your awareness.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen when you're mindful is what's happening. So if you have ADHD, actually, even if you don't have ADHD, most people report stuff like, I'm really bad at this. I can't do this. This is worthless when they start.
Yeah, it can be frustrating because people's expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what the expectation generally is I'm going to achieve enlightenment by focusing on my breath for 5 seconds.
I'm going to have an empty mind.
Right.
False.
I hate
False.
that. Clear your mind. How the hell do you do that?
That's not going to happen. Not going to happen.
That is like, there I have ADHD.
The brain likes to think. It's going to think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, like Eckhart Tolle talks about disidentifying from the mind. But what I'm talking about is, can you allow yourself the messiness, the fact that your mind's going to keep, as long as you're breathing, producing thought, you're going to keep hearing, you're going to keep feeling.
Right.
That's all okay. And being present is about picking a focus noticing what's happening and coming back to that focus. So if you pick up a mindfulness practice, or if you start to look at ways of being present, it's not super complicated. Your mind's going to go away, you're going to bring it back. Your awareness is going to go away, you're going to bring it back. That's how you build the muscle. But if you can do anything about this, release that idea that you're going to sit down and clear your mind. That might happen.
Right.
But
Right.
it takes practice.
It takes practice, or, you're just quiet that day. Your brain has a different rhythm for a particular day. So the next one on the list is thinking about getting medication. Well, medication is actually time-tested for ADHD. There are many different medications out there, and the most common ones have been around for a very long time, and they actually have a pretty good track record. But of course, that's another step that comes with a whole list of hang-ups and stigmas and dogmas and misinformation with
For
it.
sure, yeah. And a lot of people are going in reporting their symptoms and getting diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, depression, bipolar. I'm not saying people don't have those experiences or those mental illnesses, and at the same time, ADHD is really commonly missed. SSRIs, antidepressants, are really commonly thrown at people with ADHD, and what a lot of people report is some benefit for a while, and then it stops working, or the side effects get to be too much.
Or sometimes they make ADHD much worse. ADHD is not enough dopamine in the brain. Many or most SSRIs actually can lower dopamine. So they might make a person feel a little bit better. They're actually really a numbing agent, but they're not going to fix the underlying cause of ADHD.
Right.
But they're real popular these days. And so, like Justus is talking about, going and seeing an actual ADHD person, because most people don't look at ADHD first. They look at depression, anxiety, bipolar, mood things first. When in reality, there's lots of evidence that suggests that we should be looking at ADHD as the umbrella and all those other things as sub-symptoms. If the ADHD is treated first, a lot of times those other things go away. So wouldn't you rather just deal with the cause rather than the symptoms? But a lot of times the way the medical system works, it's more symptom management because of just the way it is. It's just a fast-paced system. It doesn't have time to do a nuanced evaluation and deal with sometimes the root cause. So seeking an ADHD specialist for medication management can be really critical.
Totally, and that's a good reason too to also, be talking to a coach or a therapist that knows kind of this new approach to ADHD, where, there's all those quagmires that get stuck in with medication, and you always got to talk to your doctor about what works for you, but also checking in with your own system. Mm-hmm. And even though there's all that stuff to get stuck in, what we're talking about is that we've both found a simple approach medication-wise for our ADHD that is profoundly helpful and measurable and noticeable in a scientific way. And the way in which you can try medications and find exactly what works for you, not some standardized dose, but does that get me overamped, or is that optimized, or is that not enough? But knowing in your own system, again, kind of coming back to some of these principles of being present or mindful, even with the diet stuff, right? To know what works for you. Mm-hmm. And that you can dial it in a really specific way.
Yeah, which is where we come to the next thing on the list, which is getting some coaching around ADHD. And, we can put that in with therapy, but coaching is more specific. Coaching is a person that can sort of say, this is the hardware that you got mentally, psychologically, and let's figure out what your strengths are, what your challenges are, and let's figure out a plan so you can put get your life organized in a way where you're suiting your A game and minimizing what you have to do with your B game.
Right.
And so coaching can be incredibly helpful there, and there are ADHD coaches out there. You can look them up online, and Justus and I, of course, provide that in our practice as well.
And it's about connecting with another person to help you get that feedback over time. We get to kind of sit back and see these snapshots of people and see, wow, this has changed. These are your major challenges. these are places where you have massive upside and skills from what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes around to dialing in the dopamine and the norepinephrine, a lot of people with ADHD are very present. And they would have said, this mindfulness stuff is crazy, you know? So just that aspect of whether it's a coach or a therapist, the other person that you're connecting to kind of, you know, record that feedback and have somebody help you record that feedback over time. Coaching kind of being, like you said, more of on a practical level of the management of ADHD, and kind of moving into therapy as, you know, are there, you know, traumatic experiences that inform how you are in life, and removing some of that trauma, getting some help in building your capacity to be present and removing some of the obstacles that you may have mentally. But that kind of therapy aspect as a kind of a deeper look and a kind of a rewiring, if you will, of some of the really old stuff that you carry with you from this old story about ADHD or not knowing that you had it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, ADHD often comes with self-esteem problems because you're hammered your whole life from teachers and your parents because you're doing impulsive stuff. You're getting in trouble all the time. It all starts to inform a person's self-concept, how they think of themselves. And so that's where the therapy really can come in. You know, it's not easy living with ADHD in this world, in this culture, in this society. But so that can take a toll on a person. And so
Can make you think you have a mental illness.
it can make you think you have a mental illness, right? And it's really, you're just marinating in the wrong stew. Go out in the woods and you know, where's the problem?
Right.
There's no problem.
You start to experience the upside of hypersensitivity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you know, you take in the world. Go hunting and see how much of a downside ADHD is. Go to war and see how much of a downside it is. It actually becomes an upside in a lot of those circumstances. So that's a critical piece, which really segues into the last thing on our list, which has to do with recovery.
Yeah, you're talking about getting hammered by your parents.
Yeah.
Then you get into high school and you started getting hammered.
You start getting hammered.
Self-medicating.
And so self-medicating. Alcohol, drugs, overeating.
Sugar.
By the way, all dopamine-enhancing activities.
Caffeine,
and sex, porn.
Yep.
Dopamine enhancing. Isn't that interesting? I don't have enough dopamine in my brain. Boy, would I be susceptible to that than maybe the average person? Yes. So looking at a person's drug and alcohol and behavioral addictions can become really a critical part of this.
No doubt. And a lot of people will say stuff like, I'm an addictive person, or I'm an addictive personality. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I'm looking at recovery and addiction, I'm looking at this kind of more subtle level too, of like how we're kind of encouraged to seek out quick fixes here and there, and just noticing for yourself in the same way of, you know, it's a little uncomfortable, but being present to the pattern of, I don't feel good, what am I then reaching for to feel better? And it helps you feel better for a while, and then it wears off.
Yep.
And then you start to feel like crap again, and you need more of it, or you want more of it, and there's not enough, or whatever. Mm-hmm. It becomes a problem over time, but you're trying to feel better, but a lot of things can only help you feel better for a limited amount of time.
Sure, totally. Yeah, and so, you know, this all ties together. If you hear this sort of a theme, especially Justus is hitting on, is like, really, you do things, you try them out, we've given you some suggestions, and then you see, does this work for me? Is this helpful for me? Yeah. Is this an area I need to pay attention to? It's just like a mindfulness process for your whole life. Mindfulness is about taking in information and just taking a look at it. How do I experience this? And so these are a handful of things you can do. You can start at any time. And in even addressing one of these different options can potentially really make life a little less challenging and a little more enjoyable.
Yeah. And so we've given you this kind of BS of 7 steps to getting help with your ADHD. And what I'd really like to plant the seed of, this little bug in your brain, is kind of like, what if there's nothing wrong with you, is what we're coming back to. What if you have ADHD and you can balance this stuff out? But doing all of this stuff to feel better is going to be unmanageable in a lot of ways. If you have ADHD and you're all on your own about the whole thing. And that's how you know you have ADHD.
Yeah.
But what if, just this crazy idea of what if it's not something that's wrong with you? And getting help with it isn't finding out something bad about you, but discovering the resources at your disposal where you can feel better most of the day.
Yeah.
For months and years.
Right.
And start to unpack some of these ideas that you're bad because of.
The most successful people in this world get help. Nobody does it on their own. And whether it's ADHD help or help for anything under the sun,